When I get the idea to make a video, it randomly happens. I could be driving, I could be editing another video, or whatever. And since this week's video takes place in the early 2000s, and I really haven't had a video oriented towards Chrysler, I went ahead and started looking at sales brochures. While I was looking through them, I couldn't help to notice the fact that from a quick glance, there were 3 of the same cars on the cover page. The 300M, the Concorde, and the LHS. Of course, none of these cars are the same, they all have different names, but were they really different from one another? I'm sure many of you watching remember these cars in their heyday, but it's been 20 years and finding these on the road now is quite rare, and that goes for all 3 of them. Maybe some of you are watching and are like, these cars are boring, but when you look at how much has changed in the car industry, you can't help but to look back at the past. This was when Chrysler actually had a full line. In 2024, with the cancellation of the 300, all that's left is the Pacifica, and even that isn't what it used to be. 20 years ago, they had the PT Cruiser, 300M, LHS, Town & Country, Concorde, Sebring Coupe, and Sebring Convertible. And so for this week's episode, I wanted to get a better understanding of these 3 full-size luxury sedans. Because like I said earlier, to a lot of people, they look identical. If these types of cars aren't really your cup of tea, or even this decade, I switch it up every week, every Saturday, or at least I try to. With that, I do sure hope you enjoyed this week's episode. I appreciate you all tuning in, and I'll try my best not to bore you all to death.
Chrysler Concorde Limited, loaded with impressive features and plenty of room for your somewhat inflated ego.
Lots of room for the ladies.
With every video, I like to provide some sort of context to help create a story. And if you are interested in watching this, then feel free to check out the description for titled chapters. The Chrysler K cars saved the brand from bankruptcy, and as time went on, every other company was coming out with newer and better ideas. Lee Iacocca's time was coming to an end, and they needed to do something or else they would go bankrupt again. And essentially, the team of designers got together and came out with the LH platform. That's the easy way of putting it. On this platform was the Concorde, New Yorker, LHS, Intrepid, and Vision. There was plans of having a Plymouth on this platform, but for many reasons it never saw the light of day. They were out of the game in 2001 anyway. The LH platform was revolutionary for Chrysler. It adopted Chrysler's new cab-forward design. Basically, they took the entire interior of the cabin and moved it forward. And what this does is it allows the passenger volume to be a lot larger. The windshield extended forward over the front wheels, the rear wheels were shifted more towards the back, the front wheels moved out towards the corners of the body, and it featured a short sloping hood. Now, Chrysler didn't invent this, some of the imports were already doing this. Also in 1975, AMC came out with the Pacer. The passenger compartment was farther forward than what was typical. However, this was a completely untouched market in the sense that they were applying this design to their full-size cars. The Cloud cars and the Neon also incorporated this cab-forward design. So when we look at them from a 2024 perspective, they look normal or to some boring. But during the times, this was a huge step in the right direction for Chrysler. Now, before everything was set in stone, the engine guys, as I'll put it, thought that this was crazy and it was never going to work. There was no place to put the manifolds, fuel injection, the entire engine. Like I said earlier, everything was pushed forward, leaving not that much room for a powerful but fuel-efficient motor. But eventually, with lots of testing and trial and error, they were able to fit the 3.5 within that tight compartment. I watched this mini documentary that explained that in the past they would have never agreed with the design and would have canceled the project. However, Chrysler really needed this to work. In 1992, the Eagle Vision makes its first appearance at the Detroit Auto Show.
Here at the Detroit Auto Show, it's the official debut of the new Eagle Vision. And many automotive experts feel that the future of Chrysler Corporation depends on the success of this car.
Everything was up in the air. For Chrysler, this was them putting everything on black. And well, it was a huge hit. So the first generation LH cars ran from 1993 until 1997 and were very popular apart from a few.
You don't have to be an archaeologist to dig one. The vision from Eagle. The car unearthed.
The Eagle Vision didn't really sell that well. For instance, in 1997, they sold 5,800 Visions to 150,000 Intrepids. With that said, for the second generation, the Vision was dropped, along with the Eagle brand itself in '98. The Chrysler New Yorker was also dropped, which was surprising at the time. The New Yorker name was around since the 40s, and throughout the years, this was a very respectable car, especially those mid to late 70s New Yorkers on that C platform. Well, when you try to sell practically two identical cars at the same time, one of them will outperform the other, and in this case the LHS was more popular, and so the New Yorker name was dropped and was never heard of again. Obviously, they were different. The LHS was more to compete with the European performance segment, whereas the New Yorker aimed to be more of a traditional American luxury car. But from the outside, they do look pretty similar. And so that leads to the second generation of the LH platform debuting in 1998. Looking at this new generation, so much has changed. These cars are so much more bubbly, if that makes sense. Everything is rounded off, there's not really any sharpness to these cars. With this new iteration, the Intrepid, Concorde, and LHS all remained, and now there was the addition of the 300M. Let's take the Intrepid out of the mix. So we are left with three full-size luxury sedans from Chrysler. Buick at the time had the Park Avenue, Regal, LeSabre, and Century. Apart from the Park Avenue, they were all mid-size cars. Mercury had the Mystique, Sable, and Grand Marquis. I'm sure you all know which was the full-size in that lineup. Audi, at least for the North American market, had the A8, and Infiniti just had the Q45. What I'm saying is, having three full-size luxury sedans in the late 90s is interesting. Let's start with the Concorde. The overall length increased by 7.5 inches to the prior generation, and up until 2002, this was the longest of the three. Two engine options could be had, either the 2.7 V6 good for 200 horsepower, or the more powerful 3.2 V6 that made 225. The 300M and LHS only came with that 3.5. For the LHS, that meant 250 horsepower, and for the 300M, it meant 253. Why does the 300M make 3 more horsepower? I'm actually not too sure, but when I covered the 300M, it might make a little bit more sense. Anyway, the Concorde could be had in two different trims, either LX or LXI. The LXI trim was more luxurious and it came standard with the bigger engine. The LHS and 300M could only be had in one trim, but there were packages you could add on. One of my favorite things about the Concorde prior to 2002 was the fact that they could be had in a 6-passenger seating configuration. The LHS and 300M could not. I'm not exactly sure the last American sedan to feature this option. It may have been the Impala, but if you know, be sure to tell me in the comments. Another distinctive aspect with the Concorde over the others was the giant grille at the bottom. It almost gave the impression of a bottom breather, which is an actual term to describe a car that takes in air from below the front fascia rather than through the grille. The Dodge Avenger around this time kinda had that same look as well. Looking at the front of all three cars, the 300M does stick out a little bit more. The LHS and Concorde both feature those kidney-shaped headlights, although the LHS did feature some fog lights. The LHS replaced the Imperial and Fifth Avenue as the division's flagship model, and they competed with the traditional large luxury sedans as mentioned above. Of course, compared to the Concorde, they had more options and overall were a little more luxurious. But I asked myself, getting a fully loaded Concorde over an LHS in terms of the interior, they would be pretty identical. From the back, the Concorde and LHS do look very similar, but there were a few differences. First, Concorde was spelled out, whereas the LHS had the Chrysler logo. The exhaust was also slightly different, and the LHS added these awkward rear lights. I don't really know the purpose of them. Let's talk numbers. The Concorde LXI started at 26.5, the LHS started at 28.3, and the 300M started at 29.2. I would think that a brand's flagship car would usually correlate to being the most expensive, but that is obviously not the case here. And so why was the 300M the most expensive?
The 300 Secret. At Chrysler, the latest 300 is unveiled.
The 300 philosophy has always been one of styling leadership, presenting the newest 300.
Chrysler 300M, the 253 horsepower descendant of the legendary Letter series.
Sliding into the spacious cabin makes you feel connected to a true automotive thoroughbred.
The 300M essentially replaced the Eagle Vision, and of the three, they were marketed as being the fast luxury sedan. They were the, quote, the most powerful sports sedan in its class. Also, they were the shortest, and part of the reason to why that is was to be able to export them to Europe. But what's interesting is the LHS and the 300M shared the same engine. Yes, the 300M made 3 extra horsepower and 5 extra pound-feet of torque, but when it comes to like 0 to 60 times, they were nearly identical to each other. Of course, I'm sure the 300M handled slightly better, but at the end of the day, these cars shared a lot of the same mechanical and suspension components. The 300M did have the option to add a performance handling group package, the others did not. They had a fully independent touring suspension. Maybe there was a noticeable difference, I have no idea, I've never driven any of these cars. Maybe someone that has could say something in the comments. Of course, I'm sure each model came with different wheels. In terms of size though, they could all be had at 17 inches. Also, I'm sure each model could be had in different exterior and maybe even interior colors. I'm now going to read each title from the sales brochure for all 3 cars. Chrysler Concorde, high-tech sophistication and agility. All new 1999 Chrysler LHS, the most distinctive and luxurious Chrysler ever. Chrysler 300, even more sophisticated than its fabled predecessors. I don't see how the LHS is the most distinctive Chrysler ever when it looks identical to the Concorde. For 1998, 65,000 Concorde sold, 17,000 LHSs, and 31,300Ms. By 2000, the Concorde sold 50,000 units, 21,000 LHSs, and 51,300Ms. By 2002, the LHS and Concorde were merged together and was now called the Concorde Limited, which would live until 2004. Basically, the LHS was rebadged as the Concorde, as the front and rear would stay the same, and the 300M would live until 2004 as well. So there you have it, a short video on Chrysler's 3 full-size luxury sedans of the late 90s to early 2000s. Let me know what you guys think of this because I need to hear your thoughts and opinions. I don't even know what to think. Let's be honest, I think many of us would rather have a supercharged Regal, Bonneville, or even Park Avenue over the 300M, or even an Olds Aurora. I'm sure they were all pretty close in price. Or honestly, get a Marquis or Town Car and have a floatier ride, and you get to have a Panther. At the end of the day, these were very successful. A lot of people liked them. The reliability was hit or miss. I don't know, I'm not a mechanic. But I honestly would take a Ford or GM product around this time instead of like a 300M or Concorde. But that's just me. That is going to wrap it up for this week's video. I do sure hope you enjoyed. I believe next week we are going into the 70s. And with that said, enjoy the rest of your week. I will see you all next week.